Hi, my name's Bracken MacLeod. I'm the author of several books, including Come to Dust, 13 Views of the Suicide Woods, and coming next year from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, Closing Costs. In honor of Mother Horror's birthday, I want to read a portion of a story to you from this book, MISCREATIONS, Gods, Monstrosities, and Other Horrors. This is the limited edition hardcover, but you can find the paperback pretty much everywhere. And I know that she's a particular fan of this story, so I'm going to read to you the first part of it. It's called Not Eradicated in You. Harlow had handed him the money already, the most she'd ever saved, the most she'd ever spent at once on anything. But he held onto the paper bag, looking down at her with narrowed eyes. You sure you know what you're getting into? I mean, anybody ever showed you what to do with something like this? She shook her head. Huh, but I'm good at figuring shit out. Yeah, I bet. The guy smirked. Is there a problem? The problem was the same as it was for everyone she dealt with. No one took her seriously because she was a kid, a small one at that. When other girls her age shot up past the boys, growing tall, filling out, she stayed short and slender. Her torn, oversized black sweater made her look even smaller. Some people thought that because she was petite, she was meek. Being underestimated allowed her to get away with things other girls couldn't. She held out her hand. She wanted what the guy had promised to sell to her, what he'd told her he could get, no problem. Finding a dealer had been easier than getting the money. Mostly she collected a little at a time, scrounging change here and there, sponging from friends. Hey, can I borrow $1 for the Coke machine? Her friends knew she wasn't borrowing, but it was easier to ask that way than outright request a handout. She'd take their dollars and later produce a can of soda she'd hidden in her backpack from the fridge at home so it looked like she'd done what she said she would with the money instead of pocketing it. She kept everything she saved in a jar hidden in her bedroom closet behind a box of old stuffed animals where her mom never looked. It felt like it took forever to set aside enough, but she was patient and resisted the urge to spend even a little of her stash on other things, no matter how hungry she got. Eventually she had enough and now stood in front of this man, having given it all away, waiting for him to hand over what was hers, waiting to see if he'd treat her like every other adult she knew, or if he'd respect her. I don't know. You fuck this up, there's no taking it back. There ain't no training wheels on this shit. She didn't say anything, just held out her hand. He reluctantly passed the paper bag to her. It was smaller and lighter than she'd imagined. Harlow badly wanted to peek inside and reassure herself that she hadn't just spent a personal fortune on this man's lunch. It seemed rude, though, as if she didn't trust him. She didn't, of course, but wanted to appear worldly, like she'd done this before, 100 times, more often than she could count, and knew how something like this felt in her hand. Though they both knew this was her first time. Maybe it was a first for him, too, selling to someone as young as she. Probably not, though. Thank you, she said. His jaw flexed as he gritted his teeth. They were done. It was time for them both to leave. He sighed and held up a finger, silently asking her to wait a moment. He went to his car and leaned in through the window. A moment later he turned around with an envelope in hand. I shouldn't do this, he said as he walked back, holding it out. I shouldn't be selling any of this to you, but... He trailed off. He told her that he wouldn't be doing this deal except for the name she'd dropped. Deirdre. Her best friend's old after-school babysitter who sometimes bought them pints of ruble vodka. She said this guy owed her and gave Harlow his number. At first he accused her of making a prank call, but then she said Deirdre's name and he listened. Whatever he owed the babysitter, it had to be something. She reached out for the envelope and he yanked it back. Look, I'm not fucking around about how serious this shit is. You gotta do it right, okay? I mean, for real. People get hurt. I get it. Her voice was as thin as she was. He let her take it. Everything you need to know is in that or the bag. Pay attention. You can practice without the works, okay? But once you start using what's in there, he pointed to the bag. It's for real. No backsies. Frustration burbled up in the back of her throat. As much as she hated being spoken to like a child, she appreciated the warning. No matter how things turned out, she figured screwing it up still had to be better than not ever trying it. Thanks, she said. Yeah. The man sighed as he walked away. He waved a hand as if her gratitude was something he knew he ought to deflect. He climbed into his car and started it up. The thing rumbled like a storm, and Harlow felt the engine's vibration throb in her chest. They were meeting under the Route 2 overpass because it was private, but then he showed up in a car so loud no one could miss it. She didn't get adults. He stuck an elbow out the window and looked at her a last time before peeling out, kicking up gravel and dirt. The sound of his car lingered in the neighborhood for a long time as he sped off to wherever it was guys like him went when they were done selling their stuff to kids. Harlow turned and stalked back to the bushes where she'd stashed her skateboard and backpack. She slung the pack over her shoulder and dropped the board on the asphalt. She kicked off and rolled home. Harlow pulled the house key out of her shirt collar and bent forward to unlock the door. The aluminum beaded chain she wore the key on was too short to reach the keyhole without taking it off or leaning close. Stooping over was more difficult and embarrassing, but she was too nervous about dropping it to take off the necklace. She'd had a different key on a nicer chain that had once been her grandmother's. She'd removed it to unlock the door one afternoon and dropped it. The key fell perfectly, slipping between the boards of the front porch as if they weren't even there, and before she could drop and snatch at it, the chain slithered through the gap into the dark. It was after dark before she got inside, got something to eat. And then her mother had been furious about having to get another one made. Still, the next day, her mother gave her a replacement. She recognized how it would look to the neighbors if her tender-aged child had to sit outside on the steps waiting to be let in. Harlow stole a new chain off a rotating display on the counter at the record store downtown. She threw away the dog tag with the stupid peace sign on it and replaced it with her key. The chain wasn't as nice as her grandmother's necklace had been, but it felt sturdier and was longer. Long enough, she could bend down to unlock the door instead of having to take it off and risk losing it in the hungry porch flooring. Once inside, she shut and locked the door behind her. If she didn't remember to unlock it later when her mother had to use her key to get in, she'd undoubtedly say, "What, are you afraid someone's going to steal you?" Then she'd laugh that bitter laugh at the too familiar by repetition jape and lock the door after her, as if it weren't the exact same gesture of self-assurance her daughter had made. It wasn't that Harlow was afraid of someone coming in to kidnap her, but she felt better behind the locked door. It was something in her life she could control. The house was dark. Though it was still early and bright outside, Harlow didn't bother to open the heavy curtains. She took her skateboard to her bedroom and propped it up next to the door inside, using her backpack as a brace to keep it from sliding down and clattering on the hardwood floor. Her stomach rumbled and she thought about going to the kitchen to find something worth eating. She thought there might be some leftover Chinese in the fridge, though it was from last week and she wasn't sure if it was still good. The thought of the paper bag still concealed in her backpack tugged at her like a hook in her skin. Though she was excited to see, she hadn't opened it. Not outside. She didn't want to be caught out with what it contained, what she hoped was there. Her works, the man had called it. It might still be a ripoff. She could imagine the guy now getting high with Deirdre and laughing about the stupid girl who gave him all her money for nothing. It made Harlow want to cry. The babysitter had been so convincing. She'd seemed so sympathetic, like she wanted to help. Told her to tell the guy Deirdre said she was cool, but Harlow had no idea what something like that really meant. So here she was, with an expensive lunch sack filled with probable nonsense and a deepening despair over her proven naivete. Sniffling and pushing down her disappointment, Harlow forced herself to confront her gullibility. She unfolded the top and peered in. Her heart quickened and she pulled out a small cardboard package of skinny black birthday candles. She dropped to her knees and spilled the rest of the contents on the floor in front of her. A stubby, compressed charcoal stick fell out, the tip chipping on the floor, shedding little pieces of black like brittle shadow. 2 plastic film canisters tumbled after and rolled away, labeled with light brown masking tape. One read GYD, the other BLD. An incense cone and a small rolled piece of paper followed last. She opened the paper and read it. She hadn't been cheated. This was exactly what she'd asked for. It didn't seem like much, and most of it had likely cost the guy less than $5 to get, but then you couldn't just go to the Rexall drug and ask the pharmacist for everything he'd given her. The candles and incense and charcoal were easy to find, sure, but that last part, the little slip of paper, that wasn't something just anyone could get. That was special. You had to know. That was worth the price. Excited, she dug in her pocket for the envelope the man had given her. He seemed to go back for it as an afterthought, but opening it and unfolding the page within, she saw he'd prepared it for her carefully. She didn't know why he'd held it back, or exactly what she'd done to convince him to give it to her, but reading over it, she felt a shiver of anticipation streak up her back. Everything she needed to know was written out for her in clear detail, step-by-step instructions, and the incantation. She jumped to her feet and ran into the kitchen, snatching a bowl for the blood and earth and the black plastic film canisters and a long, sharp knife from the drawer. On her way back, she darted into the living room and grabbed her mom's lighter out of the drawer in the coffee table. She consulted the list again and found the last thing she needed in the hallway closet, a pair of scissors. In her bedroom, she sat on the floor and began reading the page carefully, the dealer's voice in her head like an echo trapped in the walls of her room slowly escaping. Pay attention. You fucked this up and there's no taking it back. She read the words in a whisper. Asmodel, king of the east. Azazel, king of the south. Paimon, king of the west. And Mahazuel, king of the north. Send and bind your servant to me. Slow down. People get hurt. She started over, careful to say each name as it was written on the page with the man's hints at pronunciation. Asmodel, Mahazuel. She studied the symbol drawn at the bottom of the page and traced it on a piece of paper before attempting it on the floor. Using the round removable lid to her laundry hamper, she traced a circle on the floor with the charcoal. Surely it was big enough. She began drawing the sigil on the page inside of it, careful to get all the lines and angles right, and placing the 6 black candles at the points. By your mistress Lilith I call you. I know your name. She pried the lid off the first canister and poured the desecrated graveyard dirt into her bowl. Dark menstrual blood followed from the second. She couldn't use her own, she was a virgin, beating on top of the dry earth and turning muddy black. Fertile soil, infertile blood. She lit the cone of incense and set it in the lid of one of the canisters. By the bowl and the blade and blood and soil, answer me, I know your name. Finally, she took a small lock of her hair in her fingers and cut. She dropped it in the bowl and whispered, Come to me and stand in my circle. I know your name. You are bound to it and me. Harlow picked up the kitchen knife with a trembling hand and held the tip over her wrist. It was going to hurt. But everything hurt. Why shouldn't her pain get her something that she wanted for a change? She pressed the tip into her skin and watched the swell of blood rise up out of her and slide over the side of her arm into the bowl. I know your name. Come and stand in my circle. I know your name, Ertzabat. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to read the rest, it's in Miscreations, Gods, Monsters, and Other Horrors. Thanks for listening.